Hello friends, it's Kaji, and today we're looking at the pros and cons of the Suzuki Boulevard M109R or Intruder 1800, depending on where you live and what you've heard more often. The motorcycle has been produced since 2006. The Intruder is the Japanese and European name, while the Boulevard is more common in the American market. Overall, the engine is 83 cubic centimeters, which is quite substantial. As you might expect, there are no carburetors here. It uses an injector and a double throttle system, 125 horsepower at 6,300 RPM and 160 Newton meters of torque at 3,200 RPM. Imagine getting 160 torque at only 3,200 RPM. For comparison, the BMW SR has 113 Newton meters, while this one has 160. It has an inverted fork, a 19.5-liter tank, weighs 350 kilograms, uses a 5-speed gearbox, a drive shaft, and takes just under 4 seconds to reach 100 kilometers per hour. Now let's discuss the pros and cons, starting with the cons. The first con is a weak clutch. Clutch issues are quite commonly reported online. Everyone complains about the clutch cable, but it's understandable here. With 1,800 cubic centimeters, the clutch has pretty substantial springs, so the cable basically counts as a disposable part here. But there's another clutch issue. In models from 2006 to 2009 and 2008, there was a really bad clutch with very hard friction plates, which basically wore out faster, and then it was loosened the locks that were in the basket. Well, it began to rattling, to bucking, and another disadvantage is this node, a gearbox actually. But let's put all this in one place. It's the gear ratio between the first and the second gears. There's a very big nuance here, which is essentially ignored by most people, and because of this, they are having some problems with operating this motorcycle. Remember that it's a cruiser, not a sport bike, and the first gear on this motorcycle is essentially just to get moving. Such a difference in gear ratio was made in the first production years so that you could only shift into the second gear when the motorcycle's speed is below 15 kilometers per hour. Of course, it was possible to shift at a higher speed than 15 kilometers per h, but then you had to shift the gear forcibly, and then it would cause all the forthcoming problems. That is, you need to understand that either you install a quick shifter or you switch from first to second gear quickly, and you can start accelerating from the second gear. This bike can handle up to 160 newtons. The second downside is the brakes. Even though the bike has radial good Tokica brakes, there are still not enough two-piston brakes at the back. There is a distinct group of people who don't understand that these big bikes with a weight of 350 kilograms or more, cruisers, need to be slowed down by the main brake, which is the rear and not the front. Everyone is used to driving on the front brakes. I don't know, driving and slowing down with the front brake is okay for a normal ride. But these bikes are slow on the rear brakes. However, this doesn't help the front brakes, which are very weak and unfortunately either needs an upgrade or just an understanding that you can speed up, and this engine can allow you to accelerate properly, but it will be a big problem to stop. The third minus is the oil level, which needs to be closely monitored. The engine consumes a bit of oil, and the most annoying thing is that the motorcycle is very sensitive to oil, and if you mess it up, you can certainly expect oil-related problems pretty much. And the fourth downside is the price of spare parts. The motorcycle really isn't cheap in maintenance. Basically, you can't expect any economy from this motorcycle, even though it costs around 600.000 rubles in our market now. But the spare parts are expensive. After all, the motorcycle initially cost about 1.3 million or something like that. That's pretty much all the downsides. One more disadvantage I would point out would be probably its clumsiness and weakness in ruts. After all, the 240 rear roller does look pretty, but in terms of functionality, it's really not that useful. That is, it's only visually appealing as it looks. Yeah, it has better grip there, but honestly, 160 isn't so much that you would need to put a 240 roller on it like the same 200th there. I reckon the roller is going to manage with such load, particularly since the weight of the motorcycle is pretty hefty, but because of the wide roller, the bike gets stuck in ruts, it doesn't turn well. That is, you can tilt it, but essentially it won't really turn at that point. It will just ride slightly diagonally. Let's go over the pros, and the first plus. It's probably the reliability of this motorcycle. In reality, it's worthwhile to mention that simplicity is also an aspect of the recipe for success in this bike, because there's nothing especially complex in it. It's very basic, everything. And the injection system, it's all come from the Jigsaw, so everything there has been tried and tested a long time ago, and there's not much to break, and the drive shaft correspondingly inverted suspension from Kayaba up front, brakes are Tokiko, so everything is extremely. There is no ABS or traction control as far as I know in the latest versions. Maybe they've already been added, but here in 2006 to 2008, unfortunately there's nothing special from the electronics except for the injector with double throttle dampers. The second plus is the engine, and the engine here is really very cool. Still 1800 cc, 125 horsepower, 160 newton meters. And its coolness is that it still gives out these 160 newton meters right from the low end. That is, there are very few motorcycles that give out their really peak values at such low revs of 3,200. Given that the idle is about 1,200, it's almost instantaneous. You get the whole range of emotions on the rear wheel. Plus, I want to emphasize that the consumption of this motorcycle is about 8 liters, which is not very much for a 1800 cc motorcycle. The fourth plus is the design. M109R looks really very cool and brutal. This is probably one of the only such powerful power cruisers you can even say that I like in their classic design. That is, yes, there is VMAX, there is X4 for example, but these are not classic cruisers after all. They are more like roadsters, such power cruisers. But there are such motorcycles there. Vitex, there is also Vroad Proper Bullwood, but Vroad is not really very competitive with this bike because it's a little bit different in principle. The engine is also a little different in terms of characteristics. That is, there are more tall ones. The fifth is sound. In fact, I'm going to give you a chance to listen to the sound. Well, having enjoyed the sound, in principle, I think there isn't anything to talk about. Sound is sound, the sound of the Imagineer. In principle, it's one of the most pleasant sounding motorcycle engines ever possible, for me at least. That's all from me. I hope you enjoyed this episode of Pros and Cons. If you're the owner of an M19R, write in the comments. My personal opinion about this motorcycle is rather skeptical because I don't like motorcycles that don't steer. Unfortunately, this motorcycle is exactly one of those that doesn't steer, and those who say it does most likely just haven't ridden motorcycles that steer normally. But this bike is for a different purpose. It's a motorcycle to sit down and then to hammer out 1,500 to 600 kilometers along the highway, or just to slowly show off in the city, revving it from traffic lights. Kagi was with you. I hope you enjoyed it. Bye bye. Good luck.